Welcome to Tipshare, where we strive to empower restaurants and their teams by providing access to valuable connections, innovative ideas, and crucial information to help transform their businesses. Today, we have a very special guest who is a serial entrepreneur and the COO of a tip distribution platform that is disrupting the hospitality industry. His company currently supports over 2,000 restaurants and nearly 100,000 restaurant professionals, and he is on a mission to revolutionize the way restaurant workers gain access to their wages. Despite his success in the restaurant tech industry, his journey didn't actually begin there. After graduating from Texas Tech University with a degree in international business, he started his career in the fashion industry and quickly became a leading marketing expert, eventually holding multiple C-level positions across various industries. But that's not all. He's also widely known for his fascinating TEDx talk, The Dark Side of Our Personal Marketing Data, which is one of the highest rated conversations about how companies use our data and specific grooming techniques to influence our buying decisions. He's a man who believes that our data is our new life story and that you should be the only author. As if that's not enough, he once received a patent for a foldable chess set just because he was bored. So please, help me in welcoming the man who I used to spar with back in high school and who is changing the game in the restaurant tech industry, the COO of TIPHAUS, Mr. Kirk Grogan. Kirk, welcome to the podcast, brother.
Thank you very much, Brad. And if you could just introduce me for the rest of my life, I would be all about it, my friend. I appreciate the warm welcome and appreciate being here with you today.
Yeah, no worries. So let's start right there at your story. A lot of people, like I said, probably don't realize that your journey began in the fashion industry. So can you talk a little bit about the path that led you from fashion to marketing to becoming a TEDx speaker and now the co-founder and COO of TIPHAUS?
I sure can. And as you might imagine, it's a little bit of an interesting story. But, from that perspective, my professional journey has kind of taken me all over the place. And that really started, I view myself as someone who sees gaps and opportunities. And then my goal is to fill that gap and then find someone who I can train to kind of take that role for me and enhance it. I'm by no means a jack of all trades. I think that's an overused term. And my real goal is I don't like inefficiency. So from that perspective, as you may be able to tell if you're watching this on video, is I was never the fashion icon or guru myself. I did not predict the trends. I wear my TIPHAUS polo and that was that. But what I was able to do is really what we now know as conversion theory. And that wasn't a term that was well known or popularized back about a decade ago when I got into this. And the whole premise there is, as a business, we want customers to take a specific action, generally a purchase. How do we get them to that stage and what steps do they have to reach on the way to that stage? So looking at it from that standpoint, that was my entire role in fashion, was understanding how did this brand want to be perceived? Who did they want to interact with? What did that look like? And on that journey, I got to work with a bunch of agencies and individuals around the world who were exceptional at this, who were phenomenal and many mentors and people I learned from. And ultimately, that actually is what led to me getting burned out. I realized quickly, and the topic of my TED Talk, of course, is the idea that the exact same way that I can make someone buy a pair of shoes can influence how people vote. You can use those tactics to influence what they believe in, what opportunities and ideals they hold accountable to. It's a really dark and messy area, which is once you realize that you can kind of move people down specific paths, particularly online, it gets really blurry as to what is helping, what's hurting, and what everything is in between. So from there, I worked with some massive tech companies and did the same thing, got them to engage, got them to be what they needed, increased that stock price by a quarter of a penny, right? And at the end of that, it just left me burned out. It wasn't really where I fell in love with. So I moved into a downtown Seattle marketing and branding agency. And I was thankful, I rose quickly to C-suite over there, running operations and utilizing my marketing pieces. And then from there, I was fortunate enough to get reached out to by some friends who had this unique idea to solve some of these restaurant managers' problems. I said, hey, they're struggling with handling tips. I think software could solve that. We gathered around and we launched it. And we had a great launch, quick pilots, easy customers to work with right off the bat, and stumbled immediately headfirst into COVID, where we did not make a sale for a year. We stopped charging our pilot customers, but as I mentioned, great co-founding team. They never stopped believing in the vision. And so we kind of looked and buckled down and said, hey, do we want to throw in the towel or do we want to believe that we're going on the right path? The timing is wrong, but if we just keep improving the product, keep taking customer feedback, by the time the market rebounds, we'll be in a great spot to land it. And sure enough, some good luck in there, of course, and fortune as business always has, but we're very fortunate now to be working with some of the largest restaurant and hospitality groups in North America.
And so for those of you out there who don't know about TIPHAUS and what their solutions are, Kirk, can you please go into exactly what it is that TIPHAUS does and how they can help restaurant workers and owners kind of solve some challenges that they're facing on a daily basis?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the easiest way to explain it, if you're not familiar with tip pooling, tip sharing, things of that nature, is that when we go out to eat and you leave your server a $20 tip, that server generally does not keep all 20 of that. They will give a dollar to the bartender for making the drinks, a dollar to the host for helping to seat the guest, 50 cents to the busser, and 50 cents to the expo. There's a lot of support staff that lets you have, as a guest, a great experience at a restaurant. Now, that is great and well and all things that we want it to be. However, we have to analyze, how do we facilitate the movement of that money? How does the manager determine who should earn what and what that looks like? And it's a logistical nightmare. It's a legal and compliance issue, and it has no transparency associated with it. So Tip House set out on one simple mission, and that was to be transparent about what happens with tips inside of the restaurant to employees. Make sure that managers stop spending their time in an Excel sheets, that they stop accidentally fat fingering a key and enter an extra zero, keeping things legally compliant. And we see it
Yep.
time and time again. So really what we do in our value prop is we save managers about 15 to 20 minutes a day. We give staff complete 100% transparency and compliance. And we make sure that these employees are able to gain access to their tips on a daily basis, as opposed to having to wait up to 2 weeks to get them. That's 70+% of their livelihoods, particularly, as you know, being in Texas and tip
Right.
credit states where it's 213. So we
Right.
want to make sure that they're able to pay their rent, that they're able to take their significant other out on a Valentine's date, all the good stuff.
And so it seems like Tip House is really committed to enhancing the swift access to restaurant worker wages. And so I guess my question would be, where do you envision the restaurant industry heading in the terms of the overall concept of tipping? And how is Tip House spearheading that revolution?
Hey, that's a great question. And I think when we look at tipping, it isn't going anywhere. And there may be resets on expectations, there may be shifts slightly, but the common argument you'll hear is, well, why not just pay your restaurant staff a living wage? Why do we need to
Right.
allow them to rely
Right.
on tips? And what we see, that sounds great in theory, but the number one group who absolutely will reject any tip overhaul is the service employees themselves.
Right.
And there are plenty of restaurants. There's plenty of studies that we can go look at. A couple restaurant groups in New York have tried it, California, where they tried to get rid of tipping for a flat wage. And they said, hey, we'll just raise the menu prices. We'll just handle this accordingly and be very upfront and transparent about it. But what we saw were guests thought the new prices were too high. The employee motivation lowered, as there's no incentive now to provide prompt or great service. And employee turnover skyrocketed because service staff can go make more at the neighborhood restaurant down the street
Right.
because they're actually accepting tips. So
Right.
ultimately, tipping really isn't much different from commissions that sales reps might make when you're selling something. So servers, bartenders, et cetera, all would absolutely leave that restaurant if they quit tipping. You cannot pay hourly enough to make up for what they're able to bring in. And Brad, as a former restaurant owner and operator, you know this well, but
Absolutely.
there are there are plenty of restaurants, and you can have the service staff making six figures. And I know that causes people to balk and say, what? This doesn't feel like skilled labor, all that. And it's absolutely skilled labor to know
100%. 100%.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
A rotating menu of 100 items, knowing what wines to pair with what, knowing guests by name and your regulars, and getting all the side work done. So it's an incredible skill set to have. In like all pools of labor, the best ones are able to rise to the top. They're able to work at the finest or busiest locations and make the most money. Now, the counter side of this is
Right.
correct. There are some backlashes to it. We're starting to see places, coffee shops, counter service, places that don't have that same level of service that are making a minimum suggested tip of 25%. And that's going to be tough, right? And so, really, I think the reset I mentioned earlier is going to come from tips should be directly proportionate to service provided. And so, a server who recommends a wine with the meal or brings everything to your table, gets everything cleaned up, prepares things between courses, absolutely deserves a great tip. But when you look at really high volume places, these counter service kind of assembly lines to assemble a burrito or a sandwich or a taco, that is skilled labor as well. And they're busting their ass, and I don't want to shortchange that. But they are going to put through a much higher volume. So 20% makes a lot less sense in those scenarios. I think we'll kind of settle around 5 to 10% in that area. And if you ever want to tip more, if you had a great experience, that's the beauty of tipping, is it still leaves the power in the consumer's hands as to how they feel about their service and what they were treated like that day.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it was with Craft Pies Pizza. Is we had suggested tips, we were counter service, and we always fell in between that 8 to 12% average tip percentage for our concept. And so we would have higher suggested tip options, 15 to 18%, but the vast majority of our consumers would leave anywhere between that 8 to 12% tip range. And so for us, that gave us the ability to pay a higher base wage than the 213 an hour in a traditional restaurant, but ultimately they were still making most of their money from the tips, right? But it was a nice combination of a higher base pay with a tip opportunity as well. And we attracted attracted a ton of, really amazing team members because we offered the ability for them to receive tips.
100%. And now, not to toot your own horn or celebrate yourself with it, but obviously you were a skilled restaurant operator and owner.
Sure.
It went well for you as you were able to exit the game and make a successful acquisition. And that's because you realize that, right? You realize to motivate staff to keep employed, that turnover costs so much. And so that if you can find these ways to be innovative, and tips in a large percentage is that we need to understand that employees need a living wage, that they need to be able to make sure that they can support themselves. And tips often provide a manner that the better service they provide, the friendlier and happier they are, the more hospitable they are, the more they will see that on the bottom line when they receive their paycheck.
Absolutely. Now, on that same subject, but kind of shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about how restaurant owners can create a unique value proposition for the marketing and pay flexibility when it comes to recruiting potential employees, right? So you're a marketing expert. You also are now in the wage distribution tech industry, right? You're familiar with restaurant workers, but the challenge is that obviously restaurants are really struggling to recruit and retain, their employees. So how can they get creative and kind of fill that invisible funnel, if you will?
100%. So I think really what we're looking at is the easiest and most honest answer that I can give right off the bat is transparency. And you see it time and time again in places where, we talk to restaurants that say, hey, my employee has a question about their tips. And I bring them into the back office. And of course, I take 2 pieces of paper, hold it up over the other individuals on the Excel sheet, and try to walk them through how they got to their tip number after tip pooling and tipping out and all that fun stuff. And so that was where the idea, TipHAUS combated that idea years ago with introducing the employee app, the very first of its kind piece that broke down how much you earned, how much you contributed to the tip pool, et cetera. But what I see is that managers are often afraid to pull back that curtain. They're afraid to expose what employees will make. And I think that's the absolute best source, that you want to be transparent. You want your staff to trust you and vice versa, right? So when we look at it from that standpoint, I think we have to adjust that on an operational standpoint, that you don't need to hide things from your employees. In fact, you should do the opposite. You should expose as much as you can to them. So there's no vague statements. There's no opaque earning potentials. That's just demoralizing to a staff. It's not what they want. It's much easier to motivate people to show up for work, to provide incredible service, to be a good team member when everyone knows how much they can financially benefit from it. So to answer your question, then, how do we get that information out? Well, take a look at your tips and your wages for your staff, and then put out messaging that directly aligns with that, and let employees know where they will start, how they can work to better shifts, how they can take into a bartending role and earn more, all of that fun stuff. But if you're being transparent, if you're running a well-run operation there, the absolute best source of staffing is your existing staff. That if you have great operations management, you allow your staff to earn their tips and you treat them well, your employees will recruit their friends, and we see it all the time at TipHAUS. What's the strongest word that you could have in marketing? And it's not me telling you about my brand, it's you telling a friend, right? Your friend trusts you automatically. So that trust is what you're looking for. And we see that at TipHAUS, that, they ended up doubling their recruiting because it was a bunch of, it's a quick counter service restaurant out east. I won't name them, but I do love them dearly. And what they saw was they're primarily high school and early college aged staff. That's who works there. They all have friends. They all have sorority sisters or fraternity friends. And what they realized was, hey, we're making great money and we have a clean look at the financials. We understand how much we're making, what's going on. They started recruiting their friends, and they have an overabundance of available staff in a time where it's never been harder to staff in the restaurant industry. So I would highly encourage that. It's not a gimmick. There's no, let's put out an ad that says this or that. It's just be transparent. People respond well to that. They resonate with that. And you have recruiters built into your restaurant at all times. Every server knows another server. There's service industry nights for a reason. They go out, we go out to drink and tip well, and you can recruit those individuals. So I'd highly encourage, the best messaging and marketing you can do is recognizing that your staff will do the sales for you, that you will be able to be transparent with your team. They will understand how much they can make, and they'll resonate with you. You'll never have an issue of employee turnover or getting in these quality applicants.
No, I absolutely love that. And it makes a ton of sense. And I couldn't agree more with you. I want to, kind of change gears and move into our rapid fire questions, which is my absolute favorite part of the podcast. So question number 1 is, what are some of the mistakes you see restaurants making when it comes to growing their customer base?
That's a great question. Trying to expand too heavily too fast. You look at places like Chick-fil-A or Dave's Hot Chicken, both chicken places, strangely enough, but limited menus. You know this well from your pizza spot. You want to keep your operation simple. If you do not sell cheesecake, don't be a cheesecake factory, right? Now, they're a unique example. They have an unbelievably diverse menu, but that is what they're known for. So stick to what you're known for. Keep keeping your customers happy. Make sure your employees are ready and available to treat your guest well. But I see too much of people trying to please everyone and forgetting and getting away from what made you beloved in your neighborhood to start with. Is it your service? Is it your wine menu? Is it your food or your appetizers? It does not matter.
Yeah.
But double down on the areas that are attracting your customers, and don't try to please everyone. You're never going to do it.
So I kind of categorize it as the hedgehog concept, right? You're a hedgehog, you stick to that one thing that you do better than anybody else in the world that you can be world class at. And a lot of times restaurant owners try to be all things to all people because, Dave, who's a random customer that comes in once a month, will end up suggesting, hey, you should, serve hot dogs, but you're a pizza
Sure.
restaurant. And so the next time Dave comes in, Dave orders a hot dog because he made the suggestion one time. Now this restaurant is carrying all of this inventory and all of these different cost of goods issues. And I completely agree. It's one of the biggest mistakes that independent restaurant owners and first-time restaurant owners make.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, man.
Yeah. So next question is, if today you lost everything, what business is Kirk Grogan going to start and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. Honestly, something to help productivity. I think that's what I come back to all the time. It's something I always challenge myself on. What am I doing today? Is it the most important priority that's in front of me? Or is it something that's easy because I'm procrastinating something, that's coming up later that I don't want to deal with? So all about the idea of how to prioritize your day. We've talked, a little bit about when are you most effective versus when are you not? You see it in restaurants often as well, but it applies to everyone of, are you a morning person and should you get your heavy work done then take your meetings in the afternoon because it's less action oriented? But really getting people to dive into how their brain works, how they function, how they think. Because I think, and myself, I'm the guiltiest of it potentially in the world, that I am not effective at always using my time how I should. And it's just something to monitor that, keep me up to task, keep me honest with it. I would love to find a way to help others unlock more potential of what they're doing.
Yeah, I always say that I am the king of procrastination, but there's nobody who performs better under pressure than me. And when my back's up
Sure.
against the wall, because that's just who I am as a person, right? I have the ability to perform at the absolute highest level when it matters most, but I can waste a ton of time in the process
100%.
leading up to that point. So,
I
um,
love it, man.
yeah. So the next question is actually very interesting, and I'm curious to see what your response is going to be. But how does Kirk Grogan define success?
Great question. Happiness for yourself and those around you. And that's all you have control over. I think it's as simple as that. I know plenty of fabulously wealthy people who are incredibly unhappy. And I know some of the happiest people I know make minimum wage. And that's all you can ask for, giving the people around you a resource to empower them to be fundamentally who they are. But ultimately, taking care of yourself, your loved ones, your family, and making sure that you're being the best person role model around them that you can. That's all it comes down to. I don't think it's financial. I don't think it's monetary. And I certainly don't think it's power dynamics or influence. It is really, are you happy at the end of the day? We got one life, and are you encouraging others around you to be happy that you care about? But if I could reach that stage, that's absolute success to me.
I love it. I love it. So this next question is actually a question from a previous guest who we had on the podcast. And it is, where do you see the restaurant industry in 10 years?
Ooh, that's a great question. In 10 years, I actually don't think it changes too much. I think we saw a massive tech uptick during COVID, and some of that is here to stay, some of it's not. QR codes work well in unique scenarios, but it's obviously not meant for everyone. There will be more consolidation of technology companies, and we see that. That is a very fragmented industry. You have millions of choices for labor management, time and attendance software, your point of sale, all of these fun things that naturally have these ebb and flows of they will end up under one company that will get too complacent or corporate to make big shifts. And then, of course, competitors come up that do something different. I do think we are going to be moving towards smaller physical footprints in most scenarios where we see to go and online ordering will continue to press. So your kitchen's footprint may expand while what you can seat actually may shrink. But overwhelmingly, I don't think it changes a whole lot. And I hope it doesn't. I think it's a great environment. There's always going to be nice little fringe elements. There's always going to be tech changes. There's always going to be things of that nature. But at the end of the day, what restaurants do is bring people together. And I think that part fundamentally will always exist.
I agree with that part. And I think the biggest shift that I see in the industry is the standards being raised, right? Because as access to information, as solutions become more readily available, and as there's more transparency added to the industry, I actually see the standards raising 10 to 20% or 10 to 20x, right? And ultimately, the operators and the operations and the systems and processes that are implemented in these businesses, I see them getting perfected more and more and more. And I actually think that we're going to see a big shift in. Whereas now you see independent restaurant owners typically under 5 locations. I think you're going to start seeing more independent restaurant owners with 5+ locations because of the access to training, systems and processes, and information. So I agree with everything else that you're saying. I think the only shift or the only caveat that I would add is just what training and information is going to provide to
Hey,
the industry.
that's a great take on it, Brad, and I really like that because we look at like what did the internet do? It leveled the playing field for everyone,
100%.
right? And you and I both know well that the restaurant industry tends to be a bit of a laggard industry, that they're slow to adopt, that things don't come. So
It's
I
always
totally
it's the dying diner, man. It is.
it is, bro. It will continue. So I think
Yeah.
you're spot on with that. That what we as we see the technology that other industries have adopted, how we put training forward, and I think you may be onto something with this little company called Tipshare that's helping to accelerate that, right? So
Yeah.
I love that approach, man. I spot on.
Well, I appreciate that. So the next question for me is powerful leaders ask powerful questions. And just like another leader in the restaurant space was able to ask you a question, now you have the opportunity to ask the next guest on our show. So if you could ask a question for the next guest without knowing who they are or what industry or
Sure.
expertise they have, what would that question be?
How do you intend to empower your employees? And that's it. I think that's the most important thing we can pay attention to, whether that's in the restaurant, whether that's near peer software like I am, but looking forward to how people are setting their employees up to be great leaders of tomorrow.
And I think, especially in the restaurant industry, because it is a stepping stone for many different industries, I think a great addition to that question, which I may add to it as well,
Please do.
because I like that, I liked your question so much, is how are you empowering them with skills that they're going to take with them on their next journey too, right? Because you see it so often that people come into the hospitality industry and they're here for a short stint, but is that because the leadership that they were working for didn't pour into them? Or is that because they used those skills and took them to a different industry where they had a larger impact? It's to be determined, but I would love to, empower those operators out there to really, dive into how they're going to develop their teams for life past hospitality, because the reality is that that's what's going to happen with most restaurant workers.
You were spot on. And I love that approach because I could not agree. I learned so much in my time in the service industry. I started when I was in my 16, 17 and worked there through college. And there's so many lessons. There's so many connections to make. There's so much that resembles the outside world that you can learn on a micro level with limited consequences at that stage, but they take you well off into the future. So please do enhance that question for the next guest. I do appreciate it.
No, I love it. Your question as is was perfect. I'll just ask mine as a follow-up. So
there you go.
Last question for me on the rapid fire questions is, what would be your message to restaurant owners, operators, and team members if you had the opportunity to reach millions of them directly?
That's a great question. So two things. I think I would recognize that the greatest asset in any restaurant has is your staff. Invest in the operations tools, the policies, whatever it requires to keep your staff happy. It costs so much to lose an employee. And I don't think we often pay attention to that. It leads to bad guest experiences. Novice employees make mistakes. You don't know how it's treated. I hate that approach that we only address things when it gets there, which ties directly into my point too, which is, one of my favorite quotes of vitamins are cheaper than painkillers and they're a lot better for you as well, right? We have so many restaurants reach out to us after they get hit with a tip lawsuit, after they lose half their staff, after they're closed 4 days a week because they can't stay open on that. All of those things are way more expensive than a $99 software to solve that before it happens. And there's plenty of examples out there. If your problem is not tips, look for what that is, but reach out and proactively solve that before it blows up in your face. I know it's really easy to understand and see like, hey, I got to deal with the problems in front of me today, not think about what's coming next week. But if you're being reactive instead of proactive, you're doomed to fail.
I love that. I love that. And just to timestamp your pricing, because obviously that may change. Today is
Sure.
March 2nd, 2023, so that no one comes back and says, Kirk, you lied. You said it was 99 bucks and now it's, 102. So
I agree wholeheartedly, and I appreciate that. But what I would tell you is, if anyone is listening to this from this Tipshare podcast, I'll honor that. Just let us know. Let our sales team know. I don't care what our pricing goes to. I always love people. The best customers come to us from things like this, as you know well, Brad. That they're
Yep.
doing the research. They're out there listening. I already know that's going to be an incredible customer for us because they care. So if that's the case, just let them know that Kirk said on a podcast one time for $99, and we'll pick that up for you.
Love it, man. So last thing for me is, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your background, or what TIPHAUS has to offer?
Absolutely. So easiest way, and I'm always public about it, my email is kirk@tiphaus.com, and tiphaus is the German spelling of house, so TIPHAUS. But I welcome any and all emails. I'm always happy to, and I kind of get an influx after these
Yeah.
kinds of things release, and I look forward to it. However, you can also go to tiphaus.com if you want to see what our software looks like, if you want to see what we can do for restaurants, our case studies, or any of the numbers of customers that we work with. Pop on there. You can book a demo straight from there, and our sales team is phenomenal. They are not pushy. We are not trying to make anything happen. Book a demo and say hello to any of our fabulous sales representatives that work with us.
Kirk, as always, it's a pleasure, man. That's it for today's episode. We greatly appreciate you tuning in. And if you want to connect with amazing solutions like TIPHAUS, you can also head over to tipshare.ai. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode of Tipshare.